It's time to cook with Susan Beck. Well, today we are going to make apple pie bars. We're going to make these in a jelly roll pan or on a rimmed baking sheet instead of in a pie pan. Now, this is a great time of year to make apple items because they are plentiful and seconds work just great. Go to an orchard and pick up a bag that maybe have a few bruises or something, and that's a great way to make things like applesauce, apple pies, apple crisp, and today's apple pie bars. We're going to start by peeling our apples. Before I do this, I am going to mention that I already put 2 sticks of butter into my freezer. I want my butter really, really cold. I want all my ingredients for my pie crust cold. So I'm not going to get my eggs out of the fridge yet either. I'm not going to preheat my oven though until I get a little farther along in this. Like as soon as I get my apples peeled, then things will move along a little bit more quickly. Well, if you weren't watching, I just attached this great apple core peeler and slicer to my countertop. It's got a big suction cup on the bottom, and I just pull that little lever over, and now it's attached to my counter. And you can see a little more of this if you watch my most recent video on how to make applesauce in the crock pot. You can put all your apples in a crock pot, leave them in there for like 8 hours, and you have applesauce. And that applesauce is great in the freezer, and then you can eat it all winter. Now, I didn't get my apples at the orchard this year. I have been given 2 really big boxes of apples from a friend of mine, and these are all Macintosh apples, and they're definitely not seconds. They are fantastic looking. All right, I'm going to just pop out my core, and these peels and cores will go to my chickens later. The apple just goes on to those 3 prongs, and we crank the handle. This will peel it, and this will core it. And through it goes, and you just keep going until the entire apple is through. And then you have all these nice little rings that we will slice in half. So I need about 5 cups of apples. And for me, I think that was 10. Oh, I still have the core stuck inside this one. For me, that was about 10 apples. These are just kind of some medium-sized apples, a couple smaller ones. And into my container, where I'm measuring them, go these little rings. Now, these are like little spiral rings, but if I just give them a nice cut, now I have sliced apples. So I want sliced apples for this. And again, anywhere from 4 to 6 cups would be fine. It's all just a little bit of a guessing game when you make an apple pie or an apple crisp, and including these apple pie bars. All right, so now that my apples are ready, we're going to get our butter and our eggs that have been cold. Eggs are in the fridge, butter's in the freezer. While the oven is heating up to 375 degrees, we're going to make our pie crust. This is really similar to a round traditional apple pie crust, except I am going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar to my already measured out 2.5 cups of flour. I am going to sift today. The reason I'm going to sift is because I'm using baking powder. I want a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. That gives just a little rise to that crust. Baking powder has that aluminum type taste if you get a little ball of that in one bite. So when I use baking powder, I do like to sift. It is optional if you don't want to do it. Just be sure you mix it well. And then I'm also going to add a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to sift this all into my mixing bowl. And just makes everything less clumpy. It takes out any little balls of baking powder and any little clumps of flour, and everything is just nice and fine. A little shake as I reach the end there. Oh yeah, there's definitely some larger balls, but those are all broken up now, and everything is just very, very fine. All right, into here we are going to put 2 egg yolks. We will save the whites for brushing the top of this, kind of like you might do with a pie crust as well, just to have it brown a little better. So I'm going to crack my eggs, and to separate my eggs, I'm just going to put my thumbs in there to break this apart, and I'm just going to go back and forth in my shell until the whites are in this bowl below me, and the yolk is going to go into this 2/3 measuring cup. I'll do that again. Crack my egg, break it apart with my thumbs, keep the yolk in 1/2, let any whites fall through that want to, and just kind of go back and forth until I have just the yolk. Okay, that yolk is going to go into this 2/3 measuring cup, and the amount of liquid we want is a total of 2/3 cup. So the eggs are making up part of that measurement. So I'm just gonna add, this is cold water. Again, everything should be cold until I fill it 2/3 of the way full. And that is going to go into my flour mixture as well. All right, get those egg whites off to the side. The next ingredient is your shortening. Now, I have seen these bars made, I've seen them called Danish apple bars, I've seen them called farmer's apple bars, I like to just call mine apple pie bars. I've seen them made with Crisco, I've seen them made with lard, I've seen them made with butter, I've seen them made with a combination of butter and one of those other ingredients. So, I am going to just use butter today. As I said, my butter has been in the freezer just to make it a little bit colder. And I am going to cut my butter into some tablespoons and then add it to this mixture that we have going for our crust. All right, so these I'm going to cut with a sharp knife because they are a little bit harder to cut due to the fact that they were in the freezer. And they don't need to be in perfect tablespoons or anything, but get them into some smaller pieces, and then they're going to go into this bowl as well. So all of our pie crust ingredients are in the bowl. Get that cutting board out of the way, and we're going to use a pastry blender. This pastry blender has little tines, and it really helps to kind of break this up. Now we're gonna just have to work a little bit at it, because like we said, the dough is being mixed with that, well, not frozen, but quite cold butter. Now, if you don't have one of these pastry blenders, a fork will work as well. And I put it down in there. I like to kind of twist it a little bit. And I'm working to get that flour and butter and eggs and everything all mixed together. A little bit of sugar in this. These are bars, not pie. Now, if you don't have some of these gadgets, don't think, oh, I can never make these. Like I said, a fork will work for this. Sifting is not required, and a good old apple peeler and a knife will help you peel and core your apples. Now, we're going to be making two very thin crusts, but what is nice about this recipe compared to an apple pie recipe is, when you make the apple pie, you really need to have it all looking so nice and beautiful and so forth. And with these bars, we're not going to worry about that so much. If it falls apart a little bit, we're just going to patch it back together. Our top probably won't even be completely covered. I find that a pastry cloth and then this little pastry cover that goes over my rolling pin can be helpful in making a good pie crust. Again, not something you absolutely have to have. We're going to take half of this pie crust dough and roll it out thin, and we're going to be putting it on our ungreased baking sheet. And I'm just going to roll this out, and it does sometimes help. I'm going to grab a little flour over here to have a little flour down. If you're going to do this on your countertop, you're definitely going to want some flour as well. I'm going to put some flour on my little cloth here that covers my rolling pin, and let's put that back over here again. Oh, look at that roll out so nicely. A lot of that is due to the fact it is cold. When it gets warm, it gets a little harder to work this dough and to get it picked up. Now, we need to make this a long, thin rectangle, because again, we're putting it into this jelly roll pan. Work it out this way and this way. But once we put it in the pan, we can do some flattening of it as well. Now, to get this into my pan over here, I'm just going to kind of fold it up into fourths and try to lift it in. Let's move the pan over here, and we're just going to try to fold this in half and in half again. And again, I'm not overly worried about how perfect it is. So now into here, over and over. All right, now as you can see, it's not filling every space yet. And so I'm just going to kind of flatten it in. There's a little bit of excess there. Move that over. Now what I'm finding is I've kind of got a corner over here that doesn't have any dough. So like I said, I'm not as worried if the top is quite as full. So I'm going to put a little over there, and a good chunk size over here, and just kind of flatten it with my fingers until I fill in this whole space. A little more flour on there. All right, the rest of my dough. Like I said, I probably used more than half on the bottom, but this is forgiving. It'll be fine. All right, let's roll it out. This as big as I can. Okay, we'll come back to this in just a minute. Right now, let's trade places. Slide this out here. All right, our next layer on here is kind of an interesting one. We are going to use some corn flakes. We're going to take a cup of corn flakes and we are going to crunch those up. And I have seen recipes that use this and recipes that don't. So you can try it either way you want. I tried to do some research on why this would be used, and I really couldn't find any explanation as to why we would do this. But I have a few of my own thoughts on that. One is because these cornflakes, you know, they're nice and dry, and I think it's going to help put a little layer of separation between the pie crust and the apples, because the cornflakes are going to go on and then the apples. My other thought was when you make a pie, you usually toss your apples with cinnamon sugar and flour, and that flour also serves as a bit of a thickening agent. And you know, this is just a corn grain making up these cornflakes instead of a wheat grain. So for whatever reason, I'm going to go ahead and do it today. So to crunch these up, I could use my food processor, but my rolling pin's already out, and I just find it's really easy with this small amount to put it into a little Ziploc bag and crunch those up. So now we're just going to scatter 1 cup of cornflakes on top of our pie crust, and then onto there, let's put those out a little better, go our apples. Now today I am using those Macintosh apples. I tend to buy a lot of Cortland apples. Oops, there's one of my peels in there. Cortland apples when I go up to the orchards and buy seconds. And by seconds I mean those ones that maybe fell off the tree, or they have a little spot that needs to be cut out. The seconds are the apples that don't look perfect, the ones that they can't charge quite as much for. And you can buy those in half bushel and bushel bags. And they are perfect for these recipes that I have been making lately, like the applesauce and these apple pie bars. And oh, we've had a couple apple pies this fall as well. Okay, on top of our apples, just like with an apple pie, we're gonna put in 1.5 cups of sugar. And then we're going to top that with about a teaspoon of cinnamon. But you know, I just tend to shake it on. If you're somebody who likes to measure, go for it. But I just want a little cinnamon everywhere. And then I have nutmeg in a jar, or I happen to have right now some whole nutmegs that I got at Penzi Spices. And, they smell so great, and since I have them, that's what I'm going to use today. So I'm just going to use the little grater bar on my box grater and just lost my nutmeg there. Shake this around, putting a little nutmeg everywhere. Nutmeg optional. As I looked up a variety of recipes, I actually had 2 different recipes in my own recipe box for this, and went, which one is the one I usually use? Because it's something I usually only make in the fall. Some recipes use nutmeg, some do not. Okay, so we've got everything on there that makes our pie filling. And now we're going to add this, but this time I am going to kind of just take chunks of it because I want to be sure this isn't, I can tell, going to reach all the way to the ends of my baking dish, but I want to be sure I have some pie crust everywhere. You know, like every bite has at least some. I don't want to have half my pan over here having none on it. So I'm just kind of tearing little chunks off, making sure I get some everywhere. All right, let's see. I'm going to take this one bigger piece, just put it down over here, and cover this up. And you know, like I said, it just doesn't have to look perfect, especially at the top crust. The bottom one, you know, you do kind of want to fill it all in because you want a crust under everybody's bar. But one nice thing about these being in the bar shape is that you can eat them with your hands. Cut them up, eat them with your hands. You can also cut it into a lot more pieces, where with a pie, you know, you're kind of 8 people get to eat that pie. And with this, I can cut this up, you know, easily into 16 or even 24 little bars for people. All right, this is going to go into the oven and cook for 40 to maybe even 50 minutes. We want to get this nice and golden, just like we would a top of a pie. Oh, I almost forgot. I want to take my egg whites and beat those up a little bit. Get them kind of, I don't know, sudsy looking almost. And I'm going to take a pastry brush and we're going to brush the top of all that pie crust. And if you want, you could put a little more cinnamon or sugar or nutmeg across this. You won't be using, just so you know, you will not be using the whole 2 egg whites. That would be too much. Just enough to get a little browning going on. Those egg whites help the top to just look really nice. I'm just going to go with just a little bit more cinnamon on the top. All right, now we're off to the oven. Apple pie bars from the oven. They look delicious. I'm going to let them completely cool, and then I will be adding a powdered sugar icing to the top. Well, our bars are completely cool, so we're going to make a powdered sugar icing for the top of them. And this is just a typical, simple recipe. A cup of powdered sugar. You might put this over cinnamon rolls or other frosted things. I am going to put a tablespoon of lemon juice in and a tablespoon of milk. I kind of like the lemon with the apples. You got a lot of sweetness going on with all the sugar. And then a little bit of vanilla. A lot of these types of frostings might leave the lemon juice out, but I'm going to go ahead and use it today. So I've just got powdered sugar, milk, lemon juice, and vanilla. And we want this to be, something that we can just kind of drizzle around. So if it seems a little too thick, we might add a little more milk to it to make it a little more drizzly. This looks pretty good though. So I just want to drizzle this over all of my bars to give them just a finishing touch here. So let's give this a taste. Tastes just like apple pie. Those apples just cook up perfectly. I love the cinnamon and that little hint of nutmeg. And that icing on the top just is a nice little touch that you don't get with apple pie. So stick the apple on that 3-prong system there, and I just crank, and then it starts to peel, and as it goes through this circle, it will take the core out usually. Oh my goodness. Well, let's try that with another one. And it goes right through. There comes my core out, and I just keep peeling, and every time it breaks.